Hello and welcome to this week's Connect program. My name is Roland Waterman, and I'm so grateful that you've decided to join us. I have a guest today that's going to speak into your life and into your heart, so don't change the channel. Stay tuned for this. I'm so thankful to have ministers like James Wartian on the program that are doing things to reach out to their communities and to reach the people of God and advance the kingdom of God. And so I want you to welcome with me James Wartian, who is from Cedar Rapids. And James, you're going to tell him about his ministry. Is called Ministry Essentials. So listen, every person that's involved in any sort of ministry will benefit from this message. So tell us a little bit first, James, about yourself, your family, how you got started in ministry, what you've done in the past, and how you moved into this new arena.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in California to two Christian parents, and at 5 years old, I put my trust in Christ and began growing. And just my story, I was blessed to go to a church that really believed in what you just talked about, in ministry, about missions, about outreach. And so my parents would have missionaries in the house. We had a former missionary who was one of the pastors on staff, and his wife would come to VBS and tell stories about their time in Africa, and of course she would take and unroll a snake skin as one of her stories in VBS. And of course, as a kid, it seemed like it was 20 feet long. It was probably 6 or 8 feet, but you know how those memories are as a kid.
Right.
So I just grew up loving and knowing missions and missionaries, but from a pretty early age, from around middle school on, I started feeling called to be a pastor. And yet, of course, I heard all this about missions and missionaries, so I went to Moody Bible Institute and to Dallas Seminary. And during that process, it really became clear that God had called me to be a pastor, not a missionary. But the internship I did at a church in Dallas, at Trinity Bible Church, the pastor wanted me to stay on after I got done with my internship, and so he created a position as the missions intern. So God brought both those two things together. So for 10 years at that church and 15 years now at New Covenant Bible Church in Cedar Rapids, I served as a missions pastor, getting to do the best of both worlds. So that was what was wonderful about what God has done through the ministry. And then about a year ago, through a variety of circumstances, to make a long story short, I'll be telling you a minute about Dave Shepard and Ministry Essentials. Well, if you backtrack to my years at Dallas Seminary, part of my story was just I had things I needed to deal with and was struggling with, and so got some counseling. And Dave and another individual were some of the people I saw for counseling. And so I knew Dave down in Dallas when he started Ministry Essentials. And so I've been connected, known about their ministry since it began in 1996. And he approached me about a year ago to be the operations director at Ministry Essentials. And it was not an easy decision to leave being a full-time pastor at a church to make this major change. And yet it fit really into my passion. And so actually effective April 1st of this year, I'm full-time on staff with Ministry Essentials, and I'm in that part of raising my funds so that I can begin full-time ministry with them. But I'm no longer on staff at New Covenant. I'm now with Ministry Essentials.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That would have been a hard switch. I've been to your church.
Yes.
Nice church, great people. But I mean, to give up what you might call a comfortable position.
Yes.
Of ministry in a church where you're surrounded by all kinds of people that love you, and to step out and do something new takes, number one, hearing the voice of God, knowing you heard right, and trusting God. It takes a lot of trusting God and a lot of courage to step out and do what you're doing. And so I commend you for that.
Thank you.
But so what is, so you're in the process now, you've received the appointment, but you're in the process of raising funds to feed your family with.
Yes.
Right, not to cover the cost of ministry, but to feed your family. Yeah. Did you know that we need to eat too? Do you know the pastors need to eat?
It's true.
We do. You know what? It's I don't want to go there because I could talk about this. I got a cute video I found on Facebook about giving, Christians giving and why they give, and it likened it to something else. It was cute. But anyhow, so you understand the position that you are in, and what you are doing now to begin to develop this ministry and you're part of the ministry to develop that and begin to implement it. And so what are you doing to get the word out to people and to begin to fulfill what that position is calling for?
Well, what I'm doing is meeting with individuals and sharing with groups, so that led to this connection. But the best thing to do is start with the why. Why am I doing this?
Yes.
Would be the heart of this. And that's really where God a year ago grasped my heart. From an early age, like I said, I went to churches that believed in the Great Commission, believed that we were called to make disciples, not just locally, absolutely here with our friends and neighbors, but also around the world. And so with believing in that, it just hit me. I had served for 25 years as a missions pastor and realized missionaries are just humans like us. They have the struggles that pastors, that teachers, that wherever job people have, they've got struggles, but it's compounded with all the things of what does it mean to live overseas. A friend of mine who is a missionary in the Czech Republic, Tracy Steele, actually you've had him on and talked to him. He said he just recently had someone who came from the Czech Republic when he was there as a missionary, came to visit him here in Iowa, and she had stayed here for, I think it was a year, and apologized to him. She said, "We had no idea how difficult it is to leave your culture and come to another one to live and to serve," and apologized that she didn't even understand that. And Tracy didn't need that apology, but it was affirming to him of how difficult that is. And even as a missions pastor, I've had the opportunity to travel to, I think it's well over 30 countries, to visit missionaries around the world. And I've seen secondhand temporarily what life is like on the mission field, but even I've not lived it full time, but seeing the struggles that they go through personally. And so all that to say, the why is about the Great Commission, but the Great Commission doesn't happen by God doing skywriting in the sky or things apart from us. He uses us as individuals. And so all of us as human individuals have the same needs, the same issues, the same challenges. And so when you realize that missionaries are struggling, that was one of the things I knew then, but I've experienced over 25 years as a missions pastor, that missionaries are needing help that people don't really understand. So the whole point of Ministry Essentials is helping missionaries thrive and have longevity on the mission field. So I'll give you a few statistics. And what's interesting is this whole category of what we now call member care. The term member care for missionaries was only coined around 1982. What you would think is that with missions being almost 2,000 years old, that this would have been something we'd thought about. But for whatever reason, as a category and as an emphasis, it's only been since in recent history that we've really come to realize how we care for our missionaries will make a difference. For example, 1 out of 20 missionaries right now globally leave the field each year. 1 out of 20. And so, and if you look at statistically, and this isn't just North American missionaries, they've done studies where missionaries from the Philippines going to other countries, from South Korea, from China, whatever country, this is not just a North American issue. It's across the board. Missionaries who are in another culture and context, that 47% of them do not last past the first 5 years. Now, that's not short-term missionaries who say, I'm only going to go to 2 years. Those are people who are what you might call career, long-term missionaries. They plan to go for 20 or 30 years of their lives, and they don't make it past the first 5 years. And what you have to comprehend with that is in that first 5 years, to do effective ministry in another culture, you have to learn the language, you have to learn the culture, you have to gain the trust of the people. And that doesn't happen in 3 weeks or even 3 months. You're talking in most cases a minimum of 2 to 3 years to become fluent enough in the language. And even then, you sound like you're talking like an elementary school student. And to gain the trust and understand the culture enough not to make constant faux pas and lose their interest or them not believe the gospel is credible. About 5 years, you're just starting to have credible ministry. I mean, if you and I were trying to retire and every 5 years we take our money out of the account and spend it on something and start over, we'd never have money for retirement. The Great Commission's not going to be accomplished effectively if we have half of our missionaries not able to continue after the first 5 years.
Sad.
So yeah, so there's a need there, and be very clear when I say this. A lot of missionaries are doing well enough. This isn't a slam on the missionaries. Actually, the fault is us as a church.
That's right.
Who have not taken time to understand, or we send the missionaries out and we put the expectations way up here thinking, oh, you're a godly person. You're going to handle all these stresses. When you come home, we just want to hear the glory stories of all the things that went well. We don't want to have you be real and say for 6 months, just the very fact that to mail a package took you 3 hours at the post office and wore you out. We don't want to hear those stories. We don't understand the difficulties you have with a landlord who keeps increasing your rates because you're an American, and so you can pay the higher rate and they're going to take you for. So there's so many stresses on the mission field that they feel challenged to even share with us. So, and I could go on, but there's a lot of studies finally that are happening about what's going on. But what they did back in the 90s, they did this study called Too Valuable to Lose. You can Google it, you can look it up online, you can read it. Too Valuable to Lose. In that study, they found overwhelmingly there were lots of reasons people left the mission field. And some of them would be obvious. Well, maybe people weren't praying enough for them. Maybe they lost their financial support. Maybe their kids didn't like being on the mission field. All those things were true. But overwhelmingly, like light years ahead of everything else, the number one reason that people left, you'll never guess, it was a relational conflict. It was difficulties of either interpersonally, that with other missionaries, they struggled to get along, to work well together. Sometimes relationships with the church in that country or with their mission agency. Whatever form it took, overwhelmingly, relational conflict was a driving force for people leaving the mission field. And I've experienced as a missions pastor, I know of one person, I knew her when I was back in Dallas. She went to Dallas Seminary. She knew one of the languages that she was going to go serve at in this, on the mission field. And she left, went overseas, and it ended up, she came home after the first 4-year term because of conflict with some of her coworkers, primarily driven by character issues of the team leader. And without going to all of it, there's two sides to this. God is sovereign. He's in control. I don't understand why all this happened, why she's not still on the mission field. Jesus. And God uses these things sometimes to bring people home and use them in the church or elsewhere. But from a human perspective, being good stewards and understanding some of these things, when there seem to be preventable reasons, you would think you'd want to come alongside. And relational issues, we're supposed to be as Christians known for our love for one another.
Right. Amen.
So for relational conflict to be the number one reason tells you there's something that needs to be addressed. The second most common one is character issues. And that's not, again, a slam on all missionaries, but there's things that we bring with us from our past, from our history, from things that we weren't taught, things that we struggle with that's just amplified when you're on the mission field. So when you look at the top two by far it's not mainly people not having enough money on the field or not enough prayer support. It's relationship issues and character issues are the top two reasons overwhelmingly why people don't make it on the mission field.
So, James, your ministry really is to address some of these issues.
Yes.
And for the purpose of, not fixing, but for the purpose of resourcing or helping them or helping them work through some of these difficult times that cause them to give up and want to be off the mission field. So that is your responsibility, is to bridge the gap, so to speak, between them over there and us over here that are supporting them or should be supporting them and praying for them. Right.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Dave and Jeannie Shepard saw all this. Dave is the son of a pastor. Jeannie is the daughter of a missionary. And they both, by their background and what they experienced, were both, we want nothing to do with ministry, and they decided to be counselors. So they got into counseling. That's, like I said at the beginning, how I first met Dave. And they began to say, we've got sitting in our office missionaries who've crashed and burned, and where was the church? Where were people coming alongside them before they had this issue that could have prevented them being in this office, coming home from the mission field, their marriage in shambles, or the ministry over? Exactly. So Dave and Jeannie said, well, surely something's being done, and they did the research. And at that point, there were some things, this isn't a slam on every mission agency, but for a lot of them, this wasn't a big category. And it's kind of like any of us, if you're struggling with something, some of the people you're least feeling comfortable to share it with is either your supporters or your supervisors. And to have an outside agency where that could come alongside in a preventative before you got in trouble way. So what Dave and Jeannie did was they started Ministry Essentials not to be a counseling office, and there's some great ministries that come alongside missionaries now with counseling. There are people out there doing some of these things. It's what's happened the last 30, 40 years in missions is a good thing to help missionaries. What Ministry Essentials is somewhat unique in doing is really wanting incarnational ministry. They said they wanted to take the counseling out of the office and put it into the living room. They wanted to have people able to relate to each other, and more importantly go, if my ability to succeed as a missionary was based on this mission, on this counselor, I only as good as I have the counselor with me. If they could build community around you, help you plug into spiritual community that was beyond just the counselor, then you could have the resources, even if it was long distance, with a community that could help you and not just be dependent upon one person. It also was just a matter of logistics. One of the things Ministry Essentials did was they said, there's some great counselors that you could come back to America to come visit. But that, again, it's kind of like if my marriage was struggling, I go, oh, we had a great week of therapy, and now I'm a year back on the mission field without that help. That's not really going to help me. So what if the Ministry Essential staff was much closer and they could visit more frequently, both the staff coming to where the missionary was and the missionary where the staff was. So Ministry Essentials is primarily located overseas in hubs close to where missionaries live to, again, provide that relational context.
That is incredible.
So they started this in 1996, and their goal is to come alongside the missionary, join them in their journey, and begin challenging their assumptions about God and ministry. Because think about it this way, you could help someone who's struggling with the cross-cultural issues. But if they don't love God more at the end of the day, I could give you tools to make your marriage look better or address some surface issues. But if I don't love Jesus more deeply, so they go, the spiritual component, there were a lot of things out there that were helping missionaries that were great tools, but they weren't necessarily dealing with the spiritual life underneath. So again, Ministry Essentials really wanted to focus on that spiritual component. How is my walk with Christ? Because you can't eliminate every struggle missionaries have. You really have to come alongside them and go, how do you build into them the walk with Christ so that you can handle whether it's your kid is back here in the States in college and struggling with his faith, whether you're dealing with a difficult country that your visas, you're almost every 30 days feeling like you're at risk of being kicked out of the country. I mean, you know the stories of missionaries.
We don't know what they go through.
Right.
And I think that, I hope that on the other flip side of this coin, of what you're doing, that you are somehow creating awareness with denominations and churches and believers to know what missionaries go through. And so they know how to pray for them. And I want to say this to you, not to you, I want to say this to the audience, because one thing that troubles me, the date that we're doing the actual recording here, just in the last few days, there was all these bombings in Sri Lanka. And we read it on Facebook or we hear it on the news, 300 people killed, 500 wounded, thousands that are left traumatized and grieving, ripped apart because they lost loved ones and family members in these bombings. And we sit here in front of our computer screens or our television and watch the news, and we watch this stuff, and we aren't even moved by it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even feel it. And I remember this was a live news broadcast, and I believe it was when Syria was under bombing here 3 years ago. And there was a woman that got on there. And by the way, these people are our brothers and sisters. We're going to have to look at them in heaven and say, oh gosh, I wish I'd have prayed more for you. I wish I'd have done more to help you. I wish I'd have cared more, because we're going to be face to face with them in heaven. Yeah, we are. But here's the thing. We need to have a heart for these people that are overseas. I think the American church, the people of the American church, are somewhat disassociated with or disconnected from our brothers and sisters overseas, not just the missionaries, but the believers. I mean, they're burning churches in China. There's all this stuff going on, and we just sit back and say, oh, it's just news. No, it's people. It's people, our brothers and sisters in Christ. And we have the heart of Jesus Christ in us. We're going to have a heart of compassion. We're going to weep for those that are weeping over there. We're going to weep with them. We're going to weep with them. Our hearts are going to be broken. They should be broken. We've got it so good in America, and they've got it so hard in some of these foreign countries. We need, as Christians, to have a heart for them. Back to you, James. I'm sorry. I had to just get that off my chest.
Well, and you lead into what would be helpful to these missionaries. So to answer your question, yes, one of my roles is operations director. It's a new position they've created. Ministry Essentials grown to over 10 staff members now. And so they've reached the point of needing someone who can take care of everything from the website to healthcare to all the behind the scenes stuff. They're all trained licensed counselors who are doing this ministry. And so my role is partially that, but one of it is also what you just said, to how do you help churches understand and individuals understand what are the pressures that missionaries go through.
Yes.
And someday it'd be great for you to have one of the Ministry Essentials staff who's talk to these missionaries firsthand, tell stories. I can tell you some of the ones they've shared with me. But right now, what I want to say is this, for the people, for all of you listening, here's a few ideas of what you can do. And the first and most important one is the obvious, but we fail to do it frequently, is to truly listen. If you know, just pick one missionary, or it could be a pastor, anyone you know who's involved in some sort of full-time vocational ministry, whether they're paid or not. Take time to sit down with them over a cup of coffee, over a meal, and start asking gentle questions. Don't feel like you have to pry things out of them. Don't feel like you have to force them to tell you the truth, but really ask them questions and allow them to share, and just without giving advice, without trying to fix things, listen to what they're saying and listen to their struggles and go, and they may shock you and they may talk about how they felt depressed, how they feel like God isn't at work. Don't let that faze you, but listen to what they're saying. Walk with them in that journey. Be a safe place for them.
Thank you.
And then the second part is to pray for them. And I just heard a missionary say this on a podcast I was listening to today. He says, if you skim through his newsletter, skim through to the prayer request and take time at the prayer request to actually pray for what they are talking about. Spend time lifting them up, because prayer does really make a difference. Prayer really is essential for them. It is a spiritual battle, not just a mental or emotional or intellectual battle that they're having. And so spend time listening to your missionary and praying for them. And then finally, when they come to the States, try to go, what do they need? Sometimes we impose on them and say, well, we expect you to come share all these stories with us, or we don't expect you to come home and have a great vacation at the Dells or someplace else, going, how could a missionary waste money on that? And the reality is they need time to refresh, to feel like they're human beings, their kids to feel like they're not just always performing. So allow them to be human. Don't judge them, but instead come alongside them, listen to them, pray for them, and seek how can you just be a place where they can gain life. They can gain that sense of being a real human, a real follower of Christ, but that has the same needs, desires, things that you do.
Yep.
So those would be just a couple of things, just immediate, beyond obviously missionaries needing financial support. I mean, that monthly support, that annual gift, whatever you can do, them not having the stress of the finances is huge. But I think every missionary would say that's secondary to the emotional and moral component that they need, that they need continued and built up in them. So I would say spend time with the missionaries and do all those things.
Yes. You know, I want to thank you, James, because my eyes have been open. I honestly don't think about it too much myself, but I tell you what, I know what pastors go through. And you know, can I just say this real quick? You know what, how many of you take a vacation every year? Or 2? Or 3 vacations? I mean, vacations that cost money. I'd like to ask you a question. When was the last time your pastor was able to take a vacation? Have you thought about that? Because he needs to get away, or she needs to get away and be refreshed in order to continue being an effective minister to you. So this goes for missionaries, for certain, but also pastors. Pastors, be good to your pastor. You have no clue. You have no clue what pastors go through, and they need a vacation worse than you do. They really do. And you should start something in your church to raise the money to send them on a nice 2-week vacation at least once a year and pay for it. And do the same for the missionaries. And if they need to come home for a short stretch, it costs money to do that. Will you get behind the people that are supporting you in ministry? They're in ministry supporting you, taking care of you. Will you take care of them? Will you take care of our missionaries overseas? The people that they're serving can't afford to pay them or give them anything. And so they depend upon us.
Yes, they do.
And you said there's how many counselors?
They now have 12 staff members, 12 families that are working for Ministry Essentials.
And these people need your financial support. So go to the website, contact James if you need to, but do something about this message. Don't just go on to the next thing you're going to watch on television. Do something with this message. God bless you. Thank you for watching.